In 1670s Paris, the darkest secrets were not kept in locked chests, but breathed in the very air of the night. Night had fallen over the city like a heavy, sooty blanket. The damp, muddy smell rising from the Seine River mingled with the stench of rotten vegetables and human sweat that filled the narrow cobblestone streets. Gas lamps flickered like trembling, yellow eyes in this sea of odor, creating long, quivering shadows that writhed and twisted as their light struck the plastered walls of the buildings, as if they had a life of their own. This city was a living wound of contradictions, where silk and rags, wine and sewage existed side by side, while chandeliers illuminated by thousands of candles shone with orchestrated perfection in the gilded palaces of Louis XIV. Just beyond those walls, in the courtyards where the common people lived, despair and secrecy grew intertwined like a poisonous vine. In this city where whispers were sharper than a dagger and the slightest rustle could herald danger, the night was both a shroud and a hunter. Catherine Voisin, later to be whispered with fear throughout Paris as La Voisin, moved through this world with the practiced ease of one who had memorized both its beauty and its danger. She was short in stature and slight of build, yet there was a commanding weight in her steps that made onlookers pause, and a piercing sharpness in her eyes that revealed she understood far more than she saw. Born in 1640 in one of Paris's shadiest neighborhoods, the daughter of a blacksmith and a maid, she was born into a life of hardship. Her fate was to wither away in a courtyard, smelling of iron and ash, her fingernails caked with dirt. Yet she had melted the rusty chains fate handed her and forged a key for herself, stepping onto a path where even the highest-ranking nobles feared her influence. That night, as she walked through the damp streets, the memory of her first fortune-telling client pricked like a thorn in the farthest corner of her mind. She was barely even a woman then. Her posture was timid, but her curiosity was as fierce as a predator's. That day, in a cold attic, in the rustle of the playing cards she spread with trembling hands, in the mysterious lines of palms, and in the stars that blinked coldly over the rooftops of Paris, she had caught a fleeting glimpse of the world's secret workings, of the invisible strings that governed human destiny. In that moment, the young and frightened Catherine, who had entered that dimly lit room, understood that fate was not just something to be read, but a text that could be rewritten. That night, the first stone was laid on the path that would lead her to power, fear, and ultimately to the flames. Paris inhaled secrets as easily as the smoke rising from the countless hearths that dotted its streets. La Voisin learned to find her way in this polluted air at an early age. She knew in which taverns gossip gathered, how fear could be molded into the clay of obedience, and how desire could turn into the poison of desperation. The city's belly was filled with those seeking remedies for love, revenge, wealth, relief from pain, ... And she had become the woman who offered the solutions others could not, that the church deemed sinful, and that the law ignored. Her shop was at the very center of the city's beating, bleeding heart. When a light knock came at her door, the sound was so faint it was hard to distinguish from the patter of rain on the windowpane. "Madame La Voisin?" a voice whispered from the shadows. A young woman stepped forward, holding a bundle of letters and a small, corked bottle. Her eyes shone with both fear and the fire of one last hope. The cheap fabric of her cloak was soaked from the drizzle, clinging to her shoulders. Catherine's lips curved into a measured smile, one she had practiced for hours, neither too friendly nor too cold. "You've heard of my talents, it seems. Come in, and do not speak to anyone of what you have brought with you." As she let them in, the creak of the heavy oak door closing behind them drew a final curtain between them and the outside world. Once inside, the familiar mixture of dried herbs, sharp oils, and a faint chemical scent enveloped them like a veil. On the shelves, bottles of arsenic, belladonna, and mercury each labeled in dark glass containers, stood alongside dried rose petals and animal bones over which charms had been whispered. Every item had its place, each with a purpose known only to her. Tonight, like countless nights before, she would take the threads of human desire, superstition, and fear and weave a tapestry, some of whose possibilities were innocent and others deadly. The young woman placed the bundle on the table with trembling hands. The edges of the letters were wrinkled from being soaked with tears. "Madame, you must make him love me. Make him come back to me. But I fear. He has no intention of returning." Her voice was a mere whisper, cracked with desperation. Catherine studied her for a moment in silence, like a surgeon examining the point where the scalpel will strike. She raised her hand and let it hover over the letters, the bottle, and the faint wisp of incense curling in the air. "Love," she murmured, almost to herself. What a dangerous poison when mixed with desperation, but not unattainable. Her mind began to work like clockwork, a small silver charm to summon affection, a subtle potion to be mixed into wine to awaken desire, or a darker ritual to shift the scales of fate. Each option carried a risk. A single wrong step, a single extra drop, could lead to disastrous consequences, not just for the client, but for herself. The greater her fame, the closer the executioner's rope was to her neck. She leaned toward her client, her voice low and commanding, with a sibilant quality like a snake's hiss, both seductive and deadly. "Do you understand, child? Once you choose this path, there is no turning back, and some consequences are beyond even my control." The young woman nodded, tears glistening in the candlelight. I understand." Catherine's mind had already moved on to the next step. She was not merely fulfilling a request. She was staging a miniature ballet of cause and effect, a performance where each participant danced unaware of the consequences. And she was the sole choreographer of this ballet. It was in these small, intimate encounters that La Voisin felt the essence of her influence. Power was not always in splendor or spectacle. Sometimes it was hidden in the trust, whispered by a desperate soul, in a fleeting breath of relief or fear. But even as she prepared her remedies and whispered her charms, a shadow lingered at the edges of her mind. The rumors, the inevitable interest of the authorities, the delicate web that connected her to aristocrats and noble clients. Each thread carried the weight of potential exposure. One wrong move, and this careful empire she had built in the shadows could collapse in an instant. But tonight, there was only the work to be done. The night would end as it always did, with another client departing under her guidance, the air filled with the intermingled sense of hope, fear, and something much darker. In the dead of night, Paris transformed into a living entity, whispering of the sins hidden behind shutters and heavy doors. The city's heartbeat pulsed in the clatter of carriages on the cobblestones, in the muffled cries of vendors closing their stalls, and in the wine-scented laughter of nobles leading secret trysts. For La Voisin, every shadow, every flickering lamp, every silent sigh held meaning. Each was a note in a symphony that only she could conduct. One evening, an invitation slid under her door like a ghost. The folded note was perfumed with the faint scent of a rose, a luxury an ordinary person could never afford. Catherine's eyes gleamed as she read the words. "Madame La Voisin, your discretion is required. Midnight, the Tuileries Palace. A friend. The Tuileries Palace, ... the king's home." Her mind raced even as she folded the note. This was forbidden territory for a common woman, but the risk brought with it the thrill she had come to crave. That dangerous, dizzying point where danger, power, and forbidden knowledge intersected. She donned her dark cloak, ensuring each step concealed her presence as she moved through the back alleys. The streets seemed to lean in as she passed, as if Paris itself held its breath. watching this small woman carry its secrets into the den of the nobility. Inside the palace, candlelight danced on the gilded walls, illuminating faces etched with ambition and whispered fears. Catherine's pulse quickened, but her expression remained serene. Among the guests were figures whose names echoed in the corridors of power: barons, duchesses, and even the king's favored mistress. Madame de Montespan, once the favorite of Louis XIV, studied Catherine with a mixture of curiosity and calculation. Her sharp, uncompromising eyes sought to measure the power in this woman who dared to step into their glittering world. "Madame la Voisin," Montespan said, her voice smooth but commanding, "I hear you possess certain talents that could be useful to those who walk in both light and shadow." Catherine inclined her head slightly, the corners of her lips curling into a faint, knowing smile. "Talents," she whispered, "are only useful to those willing to bear their consequences." That night, in a secret chamber lit by a single flickering candle, La Voisin conducted her first black mass for a member of the court. The air was heavy with the metallic scent of the incenses, herbs, and powders she had carefully prepared. She guided the participants through chants and symbolic gestures, each movement laden with meaning. Catherine's mind worked with the precision and deliberation of a watchmaker. This was no simple performance. It was a dance with fate, an interplay of fear and devotion, of secrecy and revelation. When the ritual ended and the participants left, pale and shaken, Catherine remained. Each act of manipulation, each whispered promise, brought her one step closer to influence, but also to the edge of ruin. While her rituals mesmerized and terrified her clients, it was her mastery of poisons that truly solidified her reputation. Small, perfectly measured doses, slipped into wine or food, allowed La Voisin to influence outcomes in ways the law could not touch. The thrill of controlling life and death had become a quiet obsession. One evening, a nobleman approached her with a trembling request. "Madame, I have a rival who threatens my position. A subtle persuader would be most welcome." Catherine's eyes narrowed. "Subtlety," she said, her voice almost a whisper, "is an art. An art must be handled with patience and precision. Are you prepared to accept what comes in the shadows?" The man swallowed hard and nodded. That night, Catherine prepared the potion with meticulous care. A single mistake could expose her. A single misstep could cost her client's life or her own. The court was a field of whispered alliances, sudden betrayals, and constant surveillance. Catherine navigated this field carefully, but her reputation was spreading. If she acted too boldly, she would attract the attention of the king or the police. If she was too timid, she would be forgotten. Even in her private chamber, fear accompanied her like a shadow. Her nights were sleepless, filled with thoughts of betrayal, discovery, and the delicate human lives entangled in her schemes. A poisoned child, a humbled rival, a placated royal mistress. Each outcome solidified her influence, but also reminded her of the dangerous tightrope she walked. Yet, Catherine embraced it. Power, after all, was intoxicating. In the first months of 1677, Paris was breathing a different kind of air. Fear had become a thin, almost tangible presence in every alley, marketplace, and salon. Rumors of sudden illnesses, unexpected deaths, and whispered betrayals swept through the city in waves. And at the center of this storm, Catherine Monvoisin's eyes gleamed with a mixture of calculation and excitement. La Voisin's business was no longer limited to intimate fortune-telling sessions or isolated rituals. She had built a network, a web of apprentices, street informants, and loyal associates who delivered letters, vials, and information on behalf of her clients. A boy barely 12 years old, named Pascal, ran errands for her through the narrow streets of Paris. "Madame, the shipment has arrived," he would whisper, handing her a small velvet-lined box. Inside were the meticulously prepared powders designed to adjust destinies, to tip the scales of love, loyalty, or life. Catherine opened the box carefully, inhaling the faint aroma of crushed herbs and chemicals. "Remember, Pascal, every grain matters," she said, her voice low and commanding. "A single mistake, and we are both ruined." The boy nodded, his eyes filled with a mixture of adoration and fear. It all began with whispers among the nobility. A sudden death here, a mysterious illness there. At first, no one dared to speak openly, but as the cases multiplied, a pattern emerged. La Voisin's name, once confined to whispered fortune-telling sessions, now began to surface in the salons of Paris. The seeds of suspicion had been sown. Catherine, ever vigilant, sensed the growing scrutiny, but moved with cautious grace. Still, the tension in the city was palpable, like a silent drumbeat that could explode at any moment. Madame de Montespan, who still relied on Catherine's expertise, grew bolder. She no longer sought mere advice. She demanded influence over her rivals, control over the king's favor. During a secret meeting in a dimly lit room, Montespan's eyes shone with both ambition and desperation. "Catherine, you understand, don't you? This isn't just about love. It's about survival, power, dominance." Catherine's lips thinned into a fine line. "Madame, I provide the tools, but the world itself decides the outcome. You must understand, there are forces we cannot fully command." The tension between them was electric, a dangerous mix of trust, fear, and mutual ambition. By late 1677, the authorities could no longer ignore the mounting suspicions. A series of arrests shook Paris. Minor fortune-tellers, apothecaries, and servants were taken into custody. Torture and interrogation became tools to uncover secret networks, and the rumor of a poison affair spread like wildfire. Catherine felt the walls closing in. She moved quickly, adjusting her operations, delegating tasks to trusted confidants, and masking her tracks with precision. Yet she knew it was only a matter of time before she was exposed. The city was filled with fear, and fear could easily turn to accusation. The people on the street felt the tension at every corner. "They say she can curse a man without touching him," a vendor muttered as he wrapped bread for a customer. "And they say even the nobles who dine with the king fear her." When Catherine heard such whispers on her nightly rounds, she allowed herself a faint smile. Reputation, she knew, was power. And fear was a tool she wielded as skillfully as any potion or spell. In the early days of 1679, the streets of Paris seemed to hold their breath. The news had spread that Catherine Voisin, La Voisin herself, was under investigation. The smell of bread and smoke in the air was now mingled with whispers of treason, poison, and dark rituals. One damp morning, a firm knock echoed in her chamber. Catherine looked up from her preparations, her sharp eyes narrowing. Outside the door stood a group of city guards, stern-faced and uncompromising. "Madame Voisin," the lead officer said, his voice resolute, "you are under arrest on suspicion of poisoning and witchcraft. You will come with us." Catherine's mind raced, but her expression remained calm. "Very well," she said softly. "Shall we go then?" Even as her hands were bound, she felt a strange mix of fear and exhilaration. This was the culmination of a lifetime of secrets, power, and manipulation. The moment when the fate she had so long controlled with her own hands would be taken by others. La Voisin stood before the Chambre Ardente, incense and fear heavy in the air. Judges pressed her with endless questions, torture hovering like a shadow, yet she revealed only fragments, guarding her power. Paris swirled with rumor. She had become more than a woman, a symbol of hidden danger. On February 16, 1680, she was sentenced to burn at the Place de Grève. Cloaked and unflinching, she walked past the streets of her secrets to the waiting pyre. As flames rose, silence fell. Catherine Voisin was gone, but her legend of fear, power, and forbidden knowledge would endure in the dark heart of Paris. La Voisin's story did not end with the flames. On the contrary, her legend began with them. As her body turned to ashes, the web of secrets and intrigues she had created shook the French court to its core. She entered history as eternal proof that power is not always found on thrones, but sometimes hidden in the darkest whispers. Do you think La Voisin was a ruthless murderer and schemer? Or was she a clever entrepreneur who, in a merciless world, found the only path for a woman to gain power and survive? The story shows that even the highest-ranking nobles sought answers from La Voisin. So, where does the true responsibility lie in these crimes? With La Voisin, who offered such dark services, or with the desperate and ambitious clients who demanded them? Share your thoughts and the lessons you take from La Voisin's story in the comments. And don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more historical mysteries and dark tales.